Located at a very high place, Zhang Yi found the best defensive position on an abandoned building, which was convenient for him to command the battle and provide the needed support for his team. But upon close inspection to plan some arrangements on the building's top floor, he soon found out that the abandoned commercial building he chose was restricted to him and several others. When Zhang Yi finished chatting with Zhou Qi, he decided to scout the Sect's perimeter for an advantageous position for the battle. On his way, someone called out to him from behind that made him turn his head. Zhang Yi questioned what his old classmate, Xing Tian, was doing. "Are you following me?" Xing Tian replied leisurely. "Everyone is busy setting up their defensive lines, and we don't know when the zombies will come. You should also quickly familiarize yourself with the environment." Zhang Yi smiled and asked, "You are really concerned?" "Of course." Xing Tian looked into the distance at the defensive line that his team was responsible for. "I brought all my old tricks with me. We can't afford to lose this battle." At this point, he suddenly gritted his teeth with a serious expression. "Damn it. I hope that old guy Bian Junhua doesn't play tricks on us." Zhang Yi exhaled deeply through his nose and patted him on the shoulder. "Do your best. As of now, it seems that we have no better way except to trust him." Zhang Yi began to familiarize himself with the environment and the perimeter of the entire sect, especially around St. John's Cathedral Church. As the leader of his team, he needed to support the weakest link at any time, which implied that he needed to understand every place that a member of his team would be. Then he can exert his ability according to the environment of the battlefield. He soon found the best defensive position at a single glance. And this was the abandoned commercial building next to St. John's Cathedral. It is more than 100 meters high and located somewhat behind the church, which was at the center of the sect. Its high structure was also convenient for him to command the battle of his team. And as long as he goes there, he can look down from a high place and rely on his abilities to defend all areas with a radius of about 4 kilometers. Also, if they were to lose this battle, he needed to grasp the trend of the battlefield in time to facilitate his escape together with his entire team. In order to efficiently deal with the zombies, especially the bronze-armored corpses, Zhang Yi asked Lu Karen to build a new type of bullet for him. A batch of large-caliber armor-piercing bullets for anti-materials were specially equipped. The penetration of the bullet was reduced, and it could explode, blowing any undead body to pieces after shooting into it. This made it easier to solve the zombies one by one with a large-caliber sniper rifle and explosive bombs. However, when Zhang Yi came to the abandoned building to inspect, plan, and make some necessary arrangements on the top floor, he was surprised to find out that there were several Snow Worship Sect mutants, blocking his way very cautiously, and were not allowing him or any unauthorized personnel to enter the building. "This is the forbidden area of our Snow Worship Sect. Please leave," a Sect mutant guard, who was blocking Zhang Yi, said with a serious expression. "Forbidden area?" Zhang Yi showed a playful smile on his face. This term made him feel a little funny. "Have you read too many martial arts novels?" After all, the Snow Worship Sect was established only a few months ago. This commercial building had nothing to do with them before. How come it has become a forbidden area now? "It is inconvenient for us to explain this to you, Mr. Zhang, so please do not embarrass us," the Sect mutant guard said with a cold face. Zhang Yi and his companions immediately realized that there was something fishy in that building. You see, before they got there, they encountered several Sect members whose attitude were very firm, and they were covertly warning Zhang Yi and his companions not to approach the building. But the more they did this, the more curious Zhang Yi became. However, he was unwilling to start a conflict with the Snow Worship Sect for his curiosity, so he smiled and said it was fine. "The guest follows the host's wishes," he said. "So, I will change places." Okay, this was a commercial district, so there were many high-rise buildings. Changing one will not make much of a difference. But this matter aroused Zhang Yi's strong interest. He likes to find out other people's secrets the most, because that might determine the survival of almost anyone in this apocalypse. Zhang Yi changed to a building next door. Zhang Yi and his entire team, including Zhou Qi and Flower, climbed the flight of stairs to the top of the building step by step. The height was more than 30 floors, and this made everyone a little breathless. Among the group, Chunlei was completely exhausted halfway up, and had to rest to follow the group at the end. Uncle Yu spoke up and asked Zhang Yi, "Can't you just use the double doors to cross this space? We have to climb up step by step. How troublesome." Zhang Yi turned his head with a smile. "When there is no one in the dark, I will use the double doors to move. But this ability cannot be easily exposed." Hearing this, Uncle Yu sighed. "You are too cautious." Zhang Yi's vigilance had not decreased at all, even though the major forces were currently cooperating. They soon got to the top, and Zhang Yi was able to observe the entire sect from this view. Sure enough, his choice was not wrong. From this angle, His shooting can cover the area with a radius of 3.5 to 4 kilometers centered on this place. Within this range, except for some blind spots in front, his bullets can snipe at any point. At least, he can cover the range outside the 4 lines of defense. Okay, I'll defend here, and you guys can stay in this building. After all, we don't have to fight on the front line anyway, so we can adapt to the situation. Meanwhile, Li Jian, who quickly left after meeting Zhang Yi, was in thoughts. On the way back, he was a little uneasy, and he was hesitating whether to tell Zhang Yi what he knew. Then, pray that Zhang Yi could have some sympathy and take their family away from there. But after thinking about it carefully, he denied the idea, because Zhang Yi was not a selfless saint. It was impossible for others to take them in for no reason. In this apocalyptic world, you can only rely on yourself and not blindly trust others. When Li Jian returned home, Li Kale's injuries had long recovered, but his mental state was very problematic. Having lost his manhood, the once energetic and cheerful boy had become so depressed that he had become a shell of himself. He hid himself in his tent and refused to come out or let anyone in. He even refused to eat the food brought to him. This worried Li Jian and Zhang Jianfang greatly. Li Jian walked over and tried to persuade Li Kale to leave the tent and take shelter in the church. Son, there will be another war here soon, and the battle is not small. It's very unsafe here, and the zombies may come at any time. Come with me. Inside the tent, Li Kale didn't react at all when he initially heard his father's voice. But when he heard that they would be going to the church, he suddenly yelled like a wounded beast. I'm not going. Go! All of you, go and leave me alone. And where's Su Bebe? She dislikes me, right? That must be the case. I haven't seen her. Upon witnessing this, Li Jian was speechless and helpless. He took a few steps backwards, not knowing what to do or say. He rightfully blames the sect for his current situation of his son and family. This snow cult has turned my son into what he is now. It seems that there is no point in staying any longer, he thought. On the very first day, no zombies appeared in the area around the snow worship sect, and soon nightfall descended. Some guards take turns on duty at night to prevent zombies from attacking at night, while the others rest. Very soon it was midnight, and Zhang Yi, who was resting in his car, suddenly opened his eyes. He sat up, fully awake, and behind him in the back was Uncle Yu and Chunlei, competing on who could snore the loudest. Zhang Yi carefully observed the outside perimeter through the car's window. Even at midnight, there were still people patrolling the camp, but most people had already rested. Especially the building that outsiders were forbidden to approach, there were many guards around it. After the people of the other major forces gathered here, the sect had also increased its security level at that particular building. Obviously, there were major secrets of the snow worship sect hidden there. Their vehicle was parked in front of the building selected by Zhang Yi, which was also opposite to the abandoned commercial building. After observing the scene for a while, it was pitch black inside, and every window was blocked by something, so he couldn't see the situation inside at all. The building felt like a cement coffin. What is hidden inside? Zhang Yi's curiosity was piqued, and with the ability to travel through space without regard for spatial obstacles, he couldn't help but had to investigate. After Zhang Yi calculated the distance, he opened the double doors that went directly from his vehicle to the inside of the building. The double doors led directly to the upper floors of the building first. Zhang Yi concluded that even if there were people defending the building, it would be impossible for them to be at the upper floors. And he was confident in this reasoning because he had been observing the situation in the building all day. Although there were people constantly entering and exiting the building all day, they didn't stay for long, and they came out with a few carts. Zhang Yi judged that the place might be the sect's warehouse. The distance between the two buildings was less than 300 meters, so Zhang Yi went through it directly. The next moment, he walked out of another door and appeared in a room in the abandoned building. The darkness around him had little effect on him because it wasn't pitch black. Zhang Yi could see everything, although not as clearly as during the day. Zhang Yi looked around, and there was a look of surprise in his eyes, because he discovered at a first glance that the room in front of him was filled with vines and branches of plants. So much so that vines were crawling under his feet. Plants? Are they mutant plants? The walls, ceiling, and floor of the space were covered with vines and branches of plants. And it was these things that covered the window. Zhang Yi wondered if perhaps the body of this plant is as big as the entire building. Is this the secret of the forbidden area of the snow worship sect? But what is this plant used for? Provide food? Or does it have other functions? Zhang Yi thought to himself. This was the first time he'd seen such a huge and strange plant. He wondered how it was possible, but thinking about Flower and the huge white wolfhound at the Emerald Waterside base, he immediately realized that this plant was no different. Not to mention that plants have unlimited growth capabilities. Although he didn't know what the thing in front of him was, he wasn't going to leave empty-handed, given he'd gotten an excellent opportunity to learn the secrets of the snow worship sect. Zhang Yi murmured something under his breath, and suddenly, a sword rang out from Zhang Yi's right hand. He had activated his supernatural ability, which increased his body speed and reaction ability by 8 times. And after a long period of private training with Liang Yu, his close combat strength has also improved greatly. The key was to strengthen his supernatural power and use it, if possible, to enhance his weapons also. With this, even if he encounters an enemy in such a narrow environment, he can react quickly. After a couple steps forward, Zhang Yi came across the door of the room, which was blocked by extremely large vines. Aware that it was a mysterious plant obviously related to supernatural powers, Zhang Yi decided that it was best not to touch it with his hands. Instead, he cut a hole in the wall of vines with his sword and walked through. When he came out, he was shocked, because the center of the entire building was actually dug into a sinkhole, and under his feet was the corridor, which was destroyed and occupied by its roots. Zhang Yi was amazed by the size of the huge dark green plant, which rose from the deepest part of the building like a towering sky, and went straight to the ceiling of the top floor. Is this thing a world tree? He thought. Obviously, the plant in front of him was not that kind of thing. Although there were trees that were even bigger than it in the past, Zhang Yi knew that this huge plant was definitely a mutation, and it had grown to such a size in just a few months. The most bizarre thing was that it was blood red all over, and the tree had a rhythm like human breathing. Under the black bark, the lines showed the bright red of human flesh and blood. It was as if this was not a tree, but a living person. Zhang Yi couldn't help swallowing his saliva. He didn't know whether this mutant plant was aggressive, so he was cautious and didn't dare to make a sound. Then, he carefully observed the surrounding scene. The vines and branches that covered the entire building, and the branches had many fist-sized bright red fruits. The leaves curled into ellipsoids which hung on the walls and roofs like insect eggs. No one knew what was inside. The scene in front of him was full of mystery, and in such an environment, people couldn't help but feel creeped out. Zhang Yi took several deep breaths in a row to calm himself down. He began to think about the situation in front of him. There was no doubt that he had discovered a huge secret of the snow worship sect. Then the choice came. Should he watch the excitement, pretend nothing happened and leave, or collect the fruits and branches, open the giant insect egg-like thing and take a closer look? This is a very difficult choice. Once discovered, it is very likely that the people of the snow worship sect will fight him to death. But now, will the snow worship sect dare to fight him to death at such a critical moment? Zhang Yi thought about it again and again, and finally he didn't want to miss this opportunity. So he walked over and picked 2 bright red fruits from the branches. While picking, he carefully observed the reaction of the giant plant. After seeing that it was normal, Zhang Yi was relieved, and then cut some branches and took down a few leaves. Seeing that nothing unusual had happened, Zhang Yi raised his head and looked at the densely packed cocoon-like ellipsoidal objects hanging on the wall. Will there be some big insects inside? Zhang Yi was still a little scared, to be honest. People have an instinctive disgust for insects. If he really peeled it open and saw the big bugs crawling out of it, with green mucus flowing all over his body, he would vomit all the food he had eaten the previous night. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Yi decided to get one and take a look. He would do it once and for all. He walked along the broken corridor to a cocoon, cut off its branches with his sword, and then successfully put it into his alternate space. After completing this step, Zhang Yi did not hesitate at all, and decisively opened the double doors and left the abandoned building. He was not in a hurry to study the things he had obtained. After all, he was not good at it. So Zhang Yi returned to the car and pretended to rest, but he did not sleep all night. The very next day, no one had encountered any zombie, and this scene was too weird. At the beginning, everyone expected a large-scale zombie group to attack immediately when almost every person in the entire Tianhai city had gathered at the location of the snow worship sect. However, after a day and a night, no one had even seen a single hair of a zombie. And since the zombies had not appeared, it only meant that they had been alerted to their plan, so they halted their actions. That morning, everyone gathered behind the church again to discuss the matter. The zombies suddenly stopped moving. Either they retreated, or they noticed our actions and were secretly planning something. Now, I have to consider that the wisdom of the zombie king may be much higher than we thought. Zhang Yi shared his thoughts, and it was the same as everyone. With her arms folded, Xiao Honglian frowned and added with dissatisfaction. The intelligence displayed by these strange creatures is really too high. I would believe it if there were humans guiding them from behind. So, if they don't show up, do we have to stay here all the time? No one had an answer to her question, and after a brief silence, Bian Junwu asked calmly, Are there any news from your respective bases? Everyone shook their heads. No, the base is unusually quiet. Although our people have moved underground, there are also surveillance cameras on the ground. But no zombies were found. Zhang Yi replied. Then, he suddenly thought of something and turned his gaze towards Bian Junwu. Could it be because you killed a corpse king? The existence of the corpse king was obviously special. It could be said to be the core of a group of zombies. And once the corpse king dies, the zombie group formed with it as the center will lose order. Now, it can also be concluded that there must be more than one intelligent corpse king in Tianhai City. Perhaps there is some special connection between them. Because one corpse king was killed, the others had become alert. Bian Junwu's face was expressionless. He just said to everyone calmly, "This is just the beginning. Maybe the zombies are still watching, and all we have to do is wait patiently. This is exactly like fishing. It depends on who is more patient, the fisherman or the fish. After all, no plan was absolutely perfect. And it was made based on the intelligence they have obtained so far. So, if the plan fails, then they will just try another way." Later that very day, Zhang Yi took out the things he found to show it to his team. After knowing that Zhang Yi had entered the forbidden area of the snow worship sect, everyone was a little nervous and curious. The feeling of prying into other people's secrets was particularly exciting. Zhang Yi took out the red fruit, branches and leaves, and the cocoon from his alternate space. When he took out the cocoon, the expressions on the faces of everyone present was obviously a little strange, because of the size of the cocoon. It looked like a person was wrapped inside. Zhang Yi said to Zhokir, "Zhokir, you are more familiar with using a knife here, so you will be responsible for cutting them open." Zhang Yi also provided her with any tools in the laboratory she might need, so she could completely dissect and study them. But Zhokir told him that these fruits and branches must be returned to the laboratory in the shelter for extensive research, because the environment here was not suitable for such research. However, this cocoon is a little strange. It looks like a mummy. As soon as she said this, everyone nodded and agreed with her statement. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "Let's cut it open first. Maybe things are not that mysterious." Zhokir nodded. She took out the knife from the many sharp knives that were in her medical tool bag. She picked up one, and her slender palm very steadily cut the dark green leaves from the head. Sure enough, after cutting open the leaves, a skinny corpse appeared inside. Zhang Yi recalled that there were thousands of such corpses hanging densely on the wall in the abandoned building, and he immediately knew the function of the plant. "So that's it," Zhang Yi explained in the puzzled eyes of the crowd. "There is a huge mutant plant in the abandoned building. I believe it absorbs nutrients from the corpse and then produces this kind of red fruit." Hearing this, Liang Yu continued, "We also saw many snow worshippers eating this red fruit. This is probably the source of their food. In other words, their forbidden area is actually a living granary. No wonder they are so careful and don't allow any outsiders to get close." After learning the truth, everyone inevitably felt a bit relieved that it wasn't some conspiracy. And they have no shortage of food, so no one was interested in the mutant plant that can feed thousands of people. Zhokir poked the corpse with a scalpel and found that it had been completely squeezed dry, without a trace of blood and flesh left. It seems that the corpse has indeed been completely transformed into nutrients. Zhang Yi said to Zhokir again, "After you go back, analyze the composition of this fruit and its branches and leaves to see if there is anything abnormal." Zhang Yi actually lost interest in the plant. It was just out of his usual caution that he told Zhokir. Zhokir nodded and replied, "Give me some time. This plant is very easy to study. I'll make a slice and observe it with a microscope and biological reagents." On the investigation team side, Meng Xiu took off her white gloves after she was done dissecting the corpse inside the cocoon they brought from their visit from the Sect's forbidden area. After fully examining the corpse, she said to Bian Junwu and everyone in their team who were nearby, "It's just a corpse that has been drained of nutrients. There is nothing abnormal about it. As for the fruit it produces, it has some hallucinogenic effects, which can help the high-ranking officials of the Snow Worship Sect to better control their believers. But no pathogens were found, and the sugar content is quite high. It should be considered a nutritious food." Bian Junwu pushed his dark toad-shaped sunglasses and replied that that part he knew. "When we go back, take some of the rhizomes and see if the experts in the laboratory can cultivate it. This thing is very useful." Meanwhile, deep in the abandoned building, Zhang Yixian stood in front of the blood vine and looked up at the cocoons hanging upside down and began counting. 3968, 3969, 3970. Hey, one less. And as he sighed heavily, he immediately knew that there was an intruder last night. Suddenly, his expression became dark. There is one missing again. It seems that they were so curious. The next day, there was still no trace of the corpse group. and this made everyone feel more and more gloomy. The less the corpse group appeared, the more likely it was that they were brewing a terrorist attack. Bien Junwoo has already mobilized the resources of the Jiangnan district and used their satellites to monitor the entire Tianhai city, trying to find the movements of the zombies. Finally, with the help of high technology, they really found clues. Bien Junwoo called everyone over and told them the latest news. The zombies are gathering, and they are gathering in this direction. Preliminary estimates showed that the number is at least 100,000. You must be prepared. This is a tough battle. 100,000? This number made everyone frown, momentarily speechless.